Hello, everybody. Hope everyone is staying dry and out of the hell today and still watching. Looks like we have some severe weather down to our south. Let me get the comments, make sure they are working here, and we'll get started here in just a little bit. Hopefully these will work. Looks like, yeah, it looks like there's a tornado on the ground, maybe headed toward the Riverwind Casino there on Highway 9 down in Norman. So, scary situation there, obviously. And I didn't know if I was going to make it on time to this or not. A lot of moving parts. Let me make sure this comment is going to work. I did a comment earlier to make sure it works, and it looks like it is indeed working on comments. So, very good. We'll get started here in just a few more seconds. I'm going to let everybody kind of give a few seconds. I appreciate all the great feedback you guys are giving on these updates. It's been really good. I'm glad everyone is able to do it. I know a lot of people would love to watch this trial, but I asked a few years ago, and they just don't allow these trials to be streamed. And I don't know if there's any, I don't ever know an Oklahoma trial to be streamed, and I'm sure this is the case in every county, but Logan County, I mean, you can't have your phone inside, you can't record audio, you can't record video, you can't do anything on the inside. So anytime that you see any pictures by me or by any of the news channels, Oklahoma City news channels, they are on the outside in the hallway, and the blinds are open, and so they're shooting through a blind. And so when you watch the news or see some of my videos, you'll see a blind, unless it's a really clean shot, in the hallway. So I really wish there was a way to stream these type cases, but simply not allowed in Oklahoma. And I can't remember the reason why they gave me that reason, but anyway. Got a bunch of notes to go over here in a few moments. Some of the feedback I have been getting was a timeline. I do have a timeline, and we had a serious wreck here in Guthrie, so I didn't get to spend much time on this. We had another podcast. I had to end that one, a serious wreck on Division Street, and that's why I'm wearing a hat, because it rained, it hailed at that accident, and I have a video live on. I went live at Guthrie News Page Facebook. If you want to go back and watch that after this, but I will try to have an update on that wreck as well. So, all right, let's get started. If there's any questions, please put those in the comments, and I will answer those. It would help if you put a Q or question in front of it, so I know which one to go back. I know you guys have a lot of conversations back and forth, but if you put a Q or a question and then your question, that will help me see it a lot easier on these comments. And I'm hoping, okay, no one else has made a comment yet, so I'm making sure. Timeline. So today was another busy day in trial. A lot of witnesses. We'll get to those. The biggest witness of the day was OSBI Special Agent Kevin Woodward, who was a big part of this case. And we got to hear the police interview with Dan Triplett, the formal interview with Dan Triplett. Got to hear the entire 65-minute video. We also, jurors in the gallery, also got to see the video at the crime scene, at the septic tank. And I will go over that. And the video was better than I thought. It was better than I thought. And you definitely see one body going into the hole where the septic tank once was. All right, just another update on the wreck, and it's not looking good. So more on that later. So this case, hopefully everyone's been able to catch up on the previous ones. If not, here is a little bit of a timeline that I was able to go through here real quickly, and I think this is accurate. I went through my notes, and I think this is pretty accurate. I will double check all this information, but September 20th, Brent Mack, the victim in this case, goes missing. His last phone call was at 11:25. His last text message was at 12:56. Here in a little bit, evidence shows that he was on his phone all the time. and they went through his phone records, and he basically disappeared, went silent on the rest of his phone. Dan Triplett even said he's always on that phone, but September 20th, Brent Mack goes missing, and ultimately that's the day that he was shot and killed. September 26th, September 27th, the daughter of Brent Mack could not remember, but Brent Mack's son reaches out to Brent Mack's daughter. So brother reaches out to sister and says, I haven't heard from dad. Have you heard from dad? And no one has heard from Brent Mack. September 28th, a missing person report was filed with Guthrie Police Department. Remember that came out yesterday. Haley Fisher took the stand for a Guthrie police officer, and she took that missing persons report on September 28th. September 29th, the OSBI was called in to assist with the case. September 30th, Guthrie Police Department requests interview with Dan Triplett. The first interview with Dan Triplett, which we heard today on video, took place on October 12th. There was some stuff on the phone with Dan Triplett, but the first in-person interview, October 12th. October 13th, after that interview, was the first search warrant. It was a document search warrant on Dan Triplett's house, outbuildings, and vehicles. Information on that coming up here in a few moments. October 15th, Dan Triplett's phone was taken to the OSBI, and information was pulled off of there. We talked a little bit about that yesterday on day number 2. This is day number 3. October 21st, address found in a receipt book. For a while, Dan Triplett said the last time that him and Brent Mack had worked together was on September 10th, which they did, but they also worked on September 20th. October 21st, obviously, after the address was found in the receipt book that Dan Triplett did not offer to police officers. It took a search warrant for that to take place. They went out to the scene in near Mulhall. Excavation was October 21st. October 21st, Brent Mack's body was found. And a few short time after that, on October 21st, Dan Triplett was taken into custody. So that's the timeline. Hopefully that fills in a little bit of blanks of the timeline. And I know there's been a lot of dates and times and all that stuff that I've been going through the last few days. And so, yes, thank you for suggesting the timeline. And that's why I always ask you guys to ask me questions, because I have just so much here, information written down fast, and sometimes I don't think of that. Timeline is exactly what worked, and it helped me out personally as well. Okay. Comments are working. Thank you, Ms. Tanya. It's good to know there are comments out there. A lot of people are probably watching these storms. Let's get into it today. So, before we get into today, a reminder of my disclaimer. If you are a juror, there's 12 of you, and there are 2 alternate jurors. You are not to be watching this podcast. You're not to be doing anything. Judge Corley reminds you at least twice a day, and hopefully, and it looks like a good jury. I mean, they're paying attention. Today was kind of a long day. There was some slow moments a little bit, but they still paid great attention to it. But that is the disclaimer. Do not watch any of this stuff, because you're not supposed to, and I don't want to be any part of any foolishness. Okay, so day 3 started with Michael Schmidt, Detective Michael Schmidt. At the time, now he's a lieutenant with the Guthrie Police Department. Again, Detective Schmidt, Lieutenant Bruning, and OSBI Agent Kevin Woodward have been together for this entire deal. Obviously, a reminder that Mark Bruning passed away and is obviously unable to testify. But with that, I'm going to say this right now. In that 65-minute interview with Dan Triplett and Kevin Woodward, we got to hear Mark Bruning's voice, and it was good to hear his voice, but it was very weird to hear his voice. And he is so good. He was so good at what he does and what he did. And he was big time in that interview. While he was unable to testify in that witness chair, he was a big part today in in that interview with Dan Triplett. Mark tried to work with Dan Triplett, and wasn't getting anywhere. Mark had to get a little bit more aggressive, and then he got really aggressive. He got blunt, and it was big time investigative work by Mark Bruning, as we watched many times over the years. People loved him, people hate him, but he was very good at what he did, and I will share that here in a little bit when we get to the audio interview. But I just want to get that out there. And his sister has been there the last couple of days just to kind of honor Mark in the courtroom, and I think she was very proud today. I know I was, to hear his voice and to hear what he did for a living for 25 years with the Guthrie Police Department. So Detective Schmidt, and I've not been able to go over my notes, so as I read them, you're getting to hear them, see them for the first time. I just had a whole lot going on tonight. Library video was shown on September 20th. Now, this is cross-exam. This is Dan Triplett's attorney, Ron Wallace, now talking to Detective Schmidt. Detective Schmidt said they looked at the library video on September 20th, and we talked about that yesterday. Also, the laundromat video did not show. It did show the truck of Dan Triplett, but Brent Mack was not seen in the area. A little bit more on that when Special Agent Kevin Woodward comes to the witness stand. Detective Schmidt said he listened to the phone call with Mark Bruning on a speakerphone. Dan Triplett was responsive, talking, answering all the questions that was offered by Mark Bruning. And remember yesterday, Detective Schmidt told J.R. Cochla, the assistant DA for Logan County, that Dan Triplett said, quote, "I had to get rid of him because of the violence." And early before that, it was, I had to fire him, all that stuff. And Detective Schmidt thought that was a little bit weird. And so his attorney, Triplett's attorney, talked about on that. And he said he repeated it several times, and Detective Schmidt thought that was odd. Didn't really go much further into that. Detective Schmidt said the receipt book in Dan Triplett's big truck, and found another truck, another receipt, and another truck that matched up to that September 20th, a date that Dan Triplett had not shared with police officers until a search warrant coming up here in just a second. With the receipt, not with the other receipts in the house, the Ron Wallace, the attorney, said, "Well, do you think he was trying to hide the receipt?" And Detective Schmidt said there was no indication of Dan Triplett trying to hide that receipt. His cell phone, Dan Triplett's cell phone, was seized during the document search. Dan Triplett arrived during the search, and as police officers 6 or 7 were going through his house and going through his vehicles and out, Dan Triplett sat in his recliner while they did that investigation or that search. There were 2 firearm searches looking for a .38 and a .357. They seized 3 of those guns that matched that. And then, remember, Detective Schmidt said yesterday that the house was cluttered and messy, that he wasn't even sure that they even were able to find all the guns in the house. And Dan Triplett's attorney, Ron Wallace, said, "Well, did you have a time frame? Did the search warrant say you had to be there for 30 minutes, an hour, or whatever?" And Detective Smith said no. So Ron Wallace basically got out that they had all day. There was no time frame for them to go searching for the house. So he was basically saying you had all the time you wanted inside that house to find those guns. A second member of the medical examiner's office is the one who said it might be a .38, might be a .357. Well, an OSBI firearm specialist who probably knows a little bit more than an ME said it could also be a 9mm. So a second search warrant was gone, and a 9mm was found in Sharon Triplett, the wife of Dan Triplett, one in her car, and there was 2 in Dan Triplett's, one in the house, one in the vehicle, I believe. Then he was asked about the Dollar General video. Remember, we talked about the Dollar General video, and that Dan Triplett said Brent Mack had gone into the Dollar General over in the Crescent area After detectives watching hours and hours of video, they didn't see anybody matching the description of Brent Mack going into the Dollar General, but you do see Dan Triplett's car in a 3-second window driving through. That was caught on video. A little bit more on that here in a second on that Dollar General video. Another thing, I think I forgot to mention this, the West Side Travel at 33 and 200 by the hospital, it showed Dan Triplett driving by at 7:33, and then the library video shows Dan Triplett driving at 7:47. Detective Schmidt said it should take, if you drive from the travel center, the hospital, if you will, to the library laundromat area, it takes about 4 minutes, but there's about 10 minutes of time because it took 14 minutes for the video, so they not sure what happened in those 10 minutes. There was no account of Dan Triplett on video anywhere. There was also no video around where the duffel bag was found. There was no video of who put that bag there. And as I mentioned yesterday, there was no 6 firearms were taken off to try to find a match for the bullet. All 6 of those on the ballistic report came back negative. So redirect. So J.R. Kalka, the DA for Logan County, asked, was Dan Triplett truthful in his discussion? And Detective Schmidt said no. That's why we had to get a document search warrant. And that was the final questioning for Detective Schmidt. The 7th witness called in this one here was a hairstylist. Remember, Dan Triplett gave the address of 14300 County Road 69 in Crescent. Well, the property owner of that property took the stand this morning, and he owns, his family and him own 58 acres out there. He had a septic system put in by Dan Triplett. This property owner did not hire Dan Triplett, but the builder hired Dan Triplett to organize the septic tank. It was installed about the first week of September in 2021. He couldn't remember the dates. This is him testifying. He said he saw Brent Mack and Dan Triplett working. So he works as a hairstylist in Stillwater, and he lived in Edmond at the time. So he would drive to the property just to see the progress of what was going on. And he said he got there about 8 o'clock. Remember, it's September, so it's hot. He said they were working all day in the sun. He said he spoke with Brent Mack, and Brent Mack was friendly. He thought at first Brent Mack was the boss. He said he was very talkative and very comical when he was talking with Brent Mack. The property owner said he felt a little bit comfortable because he said he could sense some frustration between Brent Mack and Dan Triplett, and that Brent Mack was ready to go home. He said they both were hot. Dan Triplett at this time was working while Brent Mack was talking to the property owner. And he said you can see the sweat through their shirt. They were working hard, and that Brent Mack was simply just wanting to go home. There was tension there he said for the 15 minutes they were there with him. Kevin Woodward called the property owner and wanted to investigate. There was a follow-up, a search. The property owner did a search consent form, which is Exhibit 119. Remember, this was the last job that police were told about, September 10th in Crescent. They don't know about the Mulhall thing because they were not told by Dan Triplett. They didn't dig anything up, and the property owner said he had heard about Brent Mack on the news and that he had died, and he thought maybe it had happened at his property until he found out it was somewhere else. Cross-exam, Ron Wallace, Triplett's attorney, he just said, again, he arrived at 8 o'clock. Dan Triplett worked as he spoke to Brent Mack. And he said they weren't argumentative. They weren't arguing back and forth. They were just, he said there was just tension between the two. And that was all his testimony. Right after that, the 8th witness called in this case was a one of the owners of the septic tank business in Drumright, Oklahoma. They're a concrete company that has septic tanks. They also have shelters. So I might say this here in a second, but off the top of my head, just going back to it, this is a company that Dan Triplett had used for over 20 years, is what the eighth witness said in this case. So they were very familiar with Dan Triplett. They've been in business since 1954. They said so you order a septic tank, and then that company delivers the septic tank. And I can't remember the words. Deliver tanks. The septic tank was ordered on September 17th. There's an invoice for that, which is Exhibit 126, that the jurors got to see the actual receipt. That was, again, placed on September 17th. It was shipped to the location, and the witness said when they deliver septic tanks, they usually set them in the ground that day. It's not uncommon that they deliver and then the next day or the day after set it then. It's not uncommon, but it's not done very often. And there was not a reason given today as an overview day. There was not a reason why it had to wait till the next day. That was never given. Maybe it will later, but it was never given why it was set the next day. As I said, it's less common to deliver, and that was it. Cross-examination. Ron Wallace said, was he a good customer? And she said yes, and that was it. Not much from there. The next witness. This was a good witness. Good witness. It was the driver who delivered the tank, a septic tank, but more importantly, he's the one who set the septic tank in. And he had worked for the company for 43 years. And you can tell he knew his job, and you can tell he was good at it too, just by listening to him on the stand. He says he drives a semi. He said a septic tank is 5,000 pounds with the lid on. He said there are occasions, very few, I wrote in my notes, that delivery is set on 2 days. Just kind of went over that. When he arrives to set the tank, his truck is backed up very close to the hole because the crane that is on the truck obviously doesn't have a long distance to set it in. So he backs up next to the hole. And he says, very important that the bottom of the hole, the ground, has to be leveled. He said September 21st, he set the tank. It was obviously delivered prior. He did not deliver. He did not deliver this, so I apologize. He did not deliver, but he's the one who set the tank. He said he knew Dan Triplett over the years. This guy said he set over thousands of tanks, but with Dan Triplett being a customer for over 20 years, he said he knew Dan Triplett. He said he was quiet, and that he's probably set 50 or more septic tanks for Dan Triplett. And at some of those sites, he knew Mack, but he never had any problems with Brent Mack. So he says the installer says he arrived at 8:30 in the morning. He left Drumright, did a storm shelter in Langston, left Langston. It was a short. He said he left Drumright at 6, got to Langston at 6:45. It was a quick install of a storm shelter. Started making his way to the septic tank install for Dan Triplett. He said he arrived around 8:30 in the morning, and that Dan Triplett called, which was out of the ordinary. This is his words on the stand. It was out of the ordinary for Dan Triplett to call him at 8:30 or early in the morning. He said he thought it was weird. Him and his partner, who were driving over there, discussed how odd it was to get a phone call from Dan Triplett. When they arrived, and this is early in the morning. This is 8:30 in the morning, and of course, this would be on September 21st the day after Brent Mack goes missing, and as we know, was buried under the septic tank. Dan Triplett was on site when they arrived. He did the delivery driver, or the installer, said he did not see Brent Mack at the scene, and that Dan Triplett was quiet in all business. They said the installer said that they usually talk with him, but not this time. Dan Triplett was quieter, and it was all business. The installer said he inspected the ground and was consistent with all the other jobs that he had seen in his 43 years of work. He's the one who operated the controls of the crane on the truck, and that he set it in the ground. Dan Triplett wrote them a check, and then they left. Again, he repeated. J.R. Cockla asked him again, and he said he did not talk and was all business. And him and his partner talked about that on their way back to Drumright. That was all that he offered to the Logan County District Attorney. And then it was cross-examination by Ron Wallace, Triplett's attorney. And he says, he asked one question. And that question was, paraphrasing here, do customers always act the same way every time? And the response by the installer said, pretty much. And there's no other questions. That was it. So I thought that was a good witness. It kind of gives you a sense of Dan Triplett and how he was the next day, early in the morning. Okay, if you're putting all this together. Witness number 10 was, so there's a construction business 500 to 600 feet away from where the septic tank was being installed. Do you remember the septic tank? There's no buildings on this property. They're putting in the tank first, and I think they might be working on buildings. I'm not sure, but there's no buildings on this property at this time. I'm not sure if there is or not now, but at the time there's nothing on there. It's just a big open area. But there's this construction company that, again, 600 yards away at the max. It's a self-employed guy. They've been in business for 23 years. His neighbor was building a house. There, again, no other structures. And this construction was straight south of the construction of the tank. He had surveillance cameras, and there was 8 total cameras involved with this one, with the surveillance, which was all on a DVR, which was put into evidence yesterday. That footage was seen today. More on that here in a second. Kevin Woodward met with the owner of the company, and they reviewed the footage together at his shop. It was a little area. They looked at it together, and they had a little bit of issues with the DVR. The owner did not know the password, so they had to reboot it. And then they looked up the manufacturer password, and they were finally able to get in there. So the timestamp was 13 hours off. It was 13 hours early. And that was easy to see because during daylight, it said midnight. Obviously, the timestamp was off, and that was really not an issue as far as the timestamp. But as a prosecutor, you're going to make sure you get all that kind of details out so that the jurors know that the timestamp is off. And so that was basically it. There was no cross-examination, no cross by Ron or Wallace, no question. So he was free to go as witness number 10. And so then the next witness, it would be the witness from the late morning all the way to about 4:30 today, and that is Kevin Woodward, the special agent for OSBI. And remember earlier I told you Detective Schmidt with the Guthrie Police Department was laying all the foundation, and now Kevin Woodward is coming in and filling in all the gaps, all the questions that the jurors obviously are thinking, as we were thinking as we were waiting for this trial to begin. So it's a page full of notes, and we'll get to that here in a second. All right. So remember, Dan Triplett told police that the last work that him and Brent Mack did was at the Crescent location, 14300 County Road 69. Exhibits 50 through 53 were given to the jurors. It's just pictures of that site. It was completed on the 8th of September. Dan Triplett called on September 10th, told the homeowner or the property owner that the work was completed. And I highlighted this and wrote it down. And I've said it a few times, but I just want to say it again. Police was originally told this was that this was the job that Dan Triplett did on the 20th. He did it on the 8th, 9th, or 10th, 7th, whatever it was. This is the job that he said the 20th. So police don't have any idea about the location of Mulhall until here in a little bit. Kevin Woodward, who was an undersheriff. He was a dispatcher here in Logan County. He was a deputy for Logan County, worked his way up to be an undersheriff in Logan County. Then he was a sheriff for 2 years in Payne County, ran for that spot, did not win the election. And that is when he started with OSBI. Extremely smart guy, extremely nice guy. You would never think he was an investigator if you talk to him. He does a really, really good job. And he's been phenomenal. He speaks very well. He looks at the jurors. You can tell the professional people who are in court all the time is they always look at the jurors and answer the questions. So the DA and the attorneys are asking questions like here, and then Kevin Woodward and other agents, and Mark Bruning was good at this as well. They would talk, and they talk to the jurors like this. So very personal with jurors. So he says he did not know Dan Triplett personally. Living here all these years, I think over 2 decades, did not know Dan Triplett, but he did know Sharon Triplett, and that Sharon Triplett did his taxes for many years. And he looked over at Sharon Triplett and smiled at her. He smiled at her one more time. I'll tell you that here again here in a second. But you can tell they were good friends, Sharon, just by the interaction from the witness stand to my immediate right where Sharon is sitting. They had a couple of nice smiles for each other. Remember, OSBI was requested by the Guthrie Police Department because the Guthrie Police Department can work within their jurisdiction. If it's outside in Logan County or obviously outside another county, outside another state, OSBI can help with that. If it's outside of their jurisdiction, of course, it ends up being outside of the police jurisdiction. So OSBI was the perfect call to make. He said last person to see Brent Mack was Dan Triplett, and that's why Dan Triplett was the one that they needed to talk to. Haley Fisher, remember, made the very first phone call with them, and then they were trying to get Dan Triplett to come to the station for an interview on September 12th. Yes, I apologize. First interview, yes. Never mind. October 12th, there was a recorded interview between Kevin Woodward, Dan Triplett, and Mark Bruning. This audio-only interview was in the office of Kevin Woodward, who requested him to come in, and Kevin Woodward's office is inside the Guthrie Police Department. So it took place inside the Guthrie Police Department. And this is a 65-minute interview, and the jurors and everybody inside the courtroom got to sit there and listen to the entire 65 minutes of this audio. I was taking notes, and this is what my notes have here. Okay, so Kevin, and I'm writing this down because Kevin Woodward's asking questions, Mark Bruning's asking questions, Dan Triplett is responding. So it might take me a few seconds to read through this, and so I might say it and then have to repeat myself who said this. But so Dan Triplett says he dropped him off on Division Street. This changes a few times where Brent Mack was dropped off at, and I'll have it a little bit later on, but it was different locations. Video doesn't back it up, and so did not help Dan Triplett on this deal here. He said that he had a tail light or a front light had burnt out, and that he had stopped on First Street to check out the light that was burnt out. Remember, and Mark Bruning kind of asking where it was at over by Smith Gallo Funeral Home, and he said yes. Remember, that's the area where the duffel bag was found. Here's a picture of that if you missed it yesterday. This is my photo. This is not evidence, but this is over there by the old lumber yard. Missy's is just a little east of that, if that kind of gives you location. But this is First Street looking toward the east. And that was a photo that I took personally. That is not evidence. But that's the area where Dan Triplett said he had looked at his front light, which was burnt out. Dan Triplett, I mentioned this yesterday. Dan Triplett said that Brent Mack was arguing with one of his customers in that I think Brent Mack was mowing. It had to be, they never said, I think he had been mowing Dan Triplett's yard or something. But anyway, Sharon Triplett sees Brent Mack ranting and raving while mowing. And Sharon Triplett says, you need to get rid of Brent Mack. You need to get rid of him. And Daniel Triplett said that Brent Mack was saying, you dog, I'm going to get my gun. That was a direct quote. But Dan Triplett said he would give Brent Mack one more chance. Mark Bruning said Brent Mack had issues his entire police career. So it starts off very calm, and they talk about this here in a few seconds, but there's interview tactics. There's a way that that investigators interview. If you watch any crime show, there's usually two people in there. One's a good guy, one's a bad guy. But right now they're just calmly talking with Daniel Triplett. And Mark Bruning was kind of letting Dan Triplett go, hey, I've been a police officer for 20 years. I've been dealing with Brent Mack my entire life. I'll have more descriptions here, but he was basically saying Brent Mack had a lot of run-ins with police. He's done a lot of bad things. So I know all about Brent Mack. And just trying to get that relationship with Daniel Triplett. The investigators are trying to pinpoint where Daniel Triplett dropped off Brent Mack. It kind of moved over from 3 different locations. And remember, at this time, police don't know anything about the job site in Mulhall. They have no idea about Mulhall. They're just, that last work order they knew was September 10th. And the investigators, Bruning and Woodward, are just repeating themselves that they don't see Brent Mack on video. On the 2 library videos, they don't see Brent Mack going into the laundromat with the video. There's no video of Brent Mack walking around. There's banks, there's other restaurants, there's a bunch of cameras in that area, and Brent Mack is not seen in any of those cameras. And they're trying to tell Dan Triplett that. Where is he at? If you dropped him off, where is he at? No, there's nothing showing where he's at. Not seeing him on video. And then so they asked a question. There was a long pause. Dan Triplett took a while to answer. He said he circled around to First Cleveland. He said Brent Mack worked for him for 4 days, about 4 days a week for him. And that Dan Triplett said he was a pain in the ass. Dan Triplett did not recall the green army bag. So Mark Bruning is asking about a green army bag a few times because obviously that was found in the area where Dan Triplett said he was at. Inside was his shoes and some pants and a hat and all that inside of a bag. And Dan Triplett said he wasn't paying any attention. He said he gave him the money, and he's in the money. He gave him $1,000 of severance pay in the truck, and he got out. Obviously, none of this can be true because we know Brent Mack, after the video today, was in that hole. But police don't know that part yet, so we got to go here. So Mark Bruning says, did you guys stop anywhere in Crescent? Did you stop by a restaurant, a convenience store, anywhere? And that's when Dan Triplett said that Brent Mack went to Dollar General to get a pair of gloves. Remember, Dollar General video did not show Brent Mack going in to Dollar General for anything. But Dan Triplett said he was for gloves in this interview. Dan Triplett said they never had a fight on the job site. And Dan Triplett said never heard from Brent Mack. And then, so now the investigation, how'd you come into town? Remember the west travel stop at 33 and Academy, shows him driving by. And then he said, first Dan Triplett said he had turned left or had turned on Division Street, and then he had circled around, and it was one time it was on Oklahoma over by Cash Saver. It was kind of all over the place. So Mark Bruning leaves the interview room, goes and gets a map. They try to do it. That map doesn't work. So they go to another map. Bruning goes and gets another map so that they can see it visually, so he can see. And it's the map that I showed yesterday. Oh, I didn't pull it up here. I'll try to pull it up here in a second. For those who missed yesterday. Remind me if I forget. He said he checked the headlights around Smith Gallo. Mark Bruning is letting Dan Triplett know that Brent Mack's phone was never used after the 20th. Dan Triplett said Brent Mack was on the phone all the damn time. He was always on there. And Mark Bruning said, hey, on September 20th, his phone went silent. For someone that's on there all the time, we would see it. We have his phone records. We see if it's pinned, off the cell towers, nothing. I mean, he basically went away. He said his existence stopped on that day with you, is what Mark Bruning said. So Mark Bruning is starting to get a little bit more aggressive in his tone, in his approach with Dan Triplett. And Dan Triplett puts an end to it here in just a second. Mark Bruning said, something happened between you two. The family needs closure. They're not going away. The family, Brent Mack's family is not going away. They need closure. He also said that he was telling Dan Triplett, hey, Brent Mack's phone is not a burner phone. It's an actual plan. So it's not like he ran out of minutes and couldn't take any more phone calls or couldn't take any more text messages. This was a phone with a plan, which was on his son's plan. But he would be getting phone calls and text messages if it was there. So not a burner phone. They talked about the mobile home. I mentioned yesterday that he said he let Brent Mack stay in. Obviously was not there. Mark Bruning again says there's cameras. He's not walking anywhere. He's not around anywhere. Not on the laundromat video, not on the library video. And something, I can't read my daggum writing. Can't read what it says, but Mark Bruning said, we've got to find him. I don't care what we do. Just tell me where where can we find him? He said on the last day alive, you guys were arguing. Remember, the property owner saw a little bit of tension between Brent Mack and Dan Triplett. And so that's what Mark Bruning is referring to. Because he thought at the time, police thought the job that was actually in Mulhall happened in Crescent. Police still don't know about the Mulhall location yet because they haven't got the warrants yet. That comes after this here. Mark Bruning, only person who can tell us where he's at is you, telling Dan Triplett that. What happened on the 20th? Was it self-defense? Tell me. Please tell me. And so now Mark Bruning is just giving Dan Triplett every clue to say. And I'm sure it was hard for the Brent Mack family to hear Mark Bruning be aggressive, talking how bad Brent Mack had did drugs. He said if Brent Mack had $1,000 severance pay, he would buy drugs. He'd be out of that $1,000 within 5 minutes. The drug people, the drug houses, nobody sees or hears from Brent Mack. If he had $1,000 in cash, he'd be at those places. And so Bruning was pretty blunt. I told you yesterday he's blunt, but truthful, and in some cases, not truthful all the time. That's another thing we'll get to. But he said, I've been dealing with Brent Mack for 25 years. He's a hothead. I've arrested him. He's a person. So Bruning's letting Dan Triplett give every opportunity to go, yeah, he was, and was it self-defense? Bruning is just trying every way to get Dan Triplett to tell him where he's at. Dan Triplett said, quote, "I don't have any answers for you." Mark Bruning says, "I know it sucks to be where you're at, but you need to tell me where it's at." And then Bruning goes a little bit step further. He says, "Listen, just tell me where he's at. You're not going to go to jail. You're not going to go to jail. I promise. I can put my hand on the Bible. Whatever you want me to do, you will not go to jail. Just let the family know. Let us know where he's at. You're the only one who knows." So Bruning has tried every aspect to get answers out of Dan Triplett. Dan Triplett said, "I dropped his ass off." And he said that I dropped his ass off a couple times. He said, "I dropped him off at the alley." Mark Bruning said, "He's got to be in town. No one has seen him. There's no video. He has to be in town." And Mark goes after him one last time pretty hard. And Dan Triplett says, quote, "I'm done here." And then Kevin Woodward says they shook hands, and Dan Triplett left the police department. So Kevin Woodward, OSBI agent, said that Kevin Woodward and Mark Bruning were not truthful in their interview. It's a tactic, they said. I'm sure they probably don't want that broadcasted, but I'm just being truthfully honest here. What happened from the witness stand? If Dan Triplett had told where he was at, probably would have gone to jail. Mark was probably a little fib there. Maybe not. Maybe arresting the next day. But he said, "You're not going to jail today." But he said, "I'm not sure what's going to happen." But anyway, that's just a tactic. They were just, again, trying to find Brent Mack. That was the goal there. Dan Triplett kept telling Kevin Woodward and Mark that they were last in Crescent. So Kevin Woodward is asked more questions by the district attorney. And they said when Dan Triplett arrived to the police for his interview, he came in with a smile and a little bit of a smirk. And that when Mark got a little bit aggressive in his questioning, that Dan Triplett started staring right past them. And I can't remember if I heard this at a preliminary hearing or if I heard it in some of the reporting that I've done. But I remember them saying Dan Triplett was staring past them in an interview. In fact, Kevin Woodward said, and this was in Kevin Woodward's office. In fact, Kevin Woodward said he turned around to see what he was staring at because he was staring right through them as the questions got a little bit more aggressive. And I couldn't remember the term last night. Thankfully, they said it in court today. It's called that 1,000-yard stare, where I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at 1,000 yards that way. And it hit me, and I started thinking, it hit me. Yesterday, someone asked about Dan Triplett's emotions when something was kind of hard or different. Dan Triplett, I noticed it, but I really noticed it today. When there's something going on, he has that 1,000-yard stare in court. He's no emotion. It is straight on looking toward the witness stand. And as I was reminded of that, I was watching Dan Triplett even more closer, and I know he was breathing, but it looked like he wasn't even breathing. He was such a statue, is how I would describe Dan Triplett looking throughout the entire morning and day. There are a few times he looks down at his notepad. A few times he'll look at his family. A few times he'll look at the clock. But it is that 1,000-yard stare at the witness stand. And I'm glad they said that because it reminded me of that. And then because that's how Kevin Woodward described Dan Triplett in the interview room. It was a reminder. Kevin Woodward said Dan Triplett was the last person to see Brent Mack. During that interview, Kevin Woodward and Mark Bruning really didn't learn anything new from that 65-minute interview with Dan Triplett. Dan Triplett did confirm that it was his truck seen in the video. Remember, going eastbound on Cleveland toward Division Street, and then it turned south on Division, which I'm sure which is the direction toward Dan Triplett's house. So, District Attorney's Office took an aerial Google view of Guthrie to kind of show the outline of Guthrie. And so they were highlighting the technology needs to get better at the courthouse. That's another thing, another topic. But Kevin Woodward was asked to, where the duffel bag was dropped off, where the library's at, where First Street's at, where Division Street's at, where Noble Street's at, where the library's at, and did all the markings so the jurors can actually see it for themselves. Remember, not all the jurors are from Guthrie, a county of 48,000 people. It reminds me, I got to talk about another thing that I was supposed to talk about, because great people ask great questions, and I want to address that here later on. So, sorry. So after that interview, they don't get the answers, and so now that search warrant, that document search warrant that I talked about a few times, was completed. 2 receipts and 2 vehicles showed September 20th at the address in Mulhall. So now police finally know about this location in Mulhall, because they were not given that. 2 receipts showed the address that had never come up, so they go out there. Kevin Woodward, the agent, goes out there, speaks with the property owners. There's no buildings out there. And they take him to the property owners take Kevin Woodward to the septic tank. And Kevin Woodward said there's a clean out that goes on top. He said that it was covered with dirt, and that one of the property owners had to kick dirt off of it to find it out. I don't know if it was covered on purpose or what. Obviously, they know where the septic tank was, but nonetheless, that's what was said. So they go back and start talking about the video that was at the construction company that looked at where the septic tank was. Camera number 4 showed the property, exhibits 121, 122, 500, 600 feet away. It was pixelated. As you can imagine, anytime you stretch in to look closer on anything, most things get pixelated. Same thing with video. Same thing happened here. Camera 4 showed the property. So OSBI gets this video and they enhance it, and they let everybody know they enhance it. So it was basically a picture. There we go. A picture in picture. So this was the original video here, and then they enhanced the video and put it down here. So you saw a closer view down here. Both were playing at the same time, but this one was closer. So you're watching the video. And this video was better than I thought. I was going to see. When you think 500, 600 yards, these must be pretty good cameras. But Kevin Woodward says that Brent Mack is wearing a white shirt, and that Dan Triplett is wearing a gray shirt. It was said a few times, I'm not sure when, but Dan Triplett had told Kevin Woodward that only Dan Triplett works on the backhoe. Brent Mack does not work any of the machinery. And you see the gray shirt. Brent Mack not allowed to work on machine, and you see the gray shirt. You can't see faces. You can't see skin tone color. You can see gray shirt and you can see white shirt. That's all you can see. So throughout the entire day, there's hours and hours and hours of video that Kevin Woodward has to go through, but they specialize in about 10 minutes of this video, the picture in picture. And you see Brent Mack watching Daniel Triplett on the backhoe scooping dirt out. Gray shirt Dan Triplett is seen getting out of the backhoe and going to the side where Brent Mack was. So you see Brent Mack down with a measuring device in the hole, and then Brent Mack disappears into the hole. Watching the video, you couldn't see the gunshot. You couldn't see anything. You just see white shirt Brent Mack just go down in the hole. They rewind it, played it again, just simply shot in the back and goes down into the hole. As this video is playing, the attorneys for Daniel Triplett, Charles Mullings, and Ron Wallace move their chairs closer so they can watch, almost right in front of me. I didn't have to move, but right in front of me, which left Dan Triplett at the table by himself. So you see Brent Mack go down. You see Dan Triplett get back on the machine, and Kevin Woodward said he counted 11 scoops. 11 scoops of dirt with the backhoe. 11 scoops were taken out. Dan Triplett was seen going in and out, the gray shirt, Dan Triplett going in and out of that hole and continue to work on the hole. Can't see faces, but you can see Dan Triplett getting on and off the backhoe. You can see Dan Triplett going to a truck, his work truck, which was at the scene. Dan Triplett re-entered the hole several times. He was seen multiple times putting dirt back in the hole. Two people, 40 minutes later, when Brent Mack goes in, two people, the landowners, come 40 minutes later and they talk for 30 minutes. They said earlier in the day there was that Brent Mack in the white shirt. They took a 15-minute break and that they were in Dan Triplett's truck. While on that break, you can see that, this is Kevin Woodward speaking, that you see Brent Mack go into the passenger seat and Dan Triplett go into the driver's seat. And Kevin Woodward said watching all those hours of video that there was no altercation between those two. Didn't see any altercation between the two that day. And so obviously with all the description, jurors are seeing the video and everyone was paying very attention to that. I got a picture of the video from outside in the hallway. I'll have to edit that. I was going to do that, but with today's wreck, I was unable to do as much work as I can. I'm going to have to edit a little bit as well, but I was able to get a picture of that. It's going to be hard to see because I was from the hallway and it's pixelated anyway. So, but that video also helped once the investigators know that there's a Mulhall location, they watch the video, they now know where to start looking for Brent Mack's body. I never thought of that, but they see the going on the south side of the hole, so that's where they began their investigation. So it made it easier for them to search for Brent Mack because the video showed what part of the hole that he was in. Brent Mack was found face down. He was ID'd. They rolled the body over and they were able to find his wallet in his pant pocket. It had a couple IDs in there. Medical examiner's office confirmed it was Brent Mack the following day. Once they found Brent Mack, Dan Triplett was arrested for first-degree murder of Brent Mack that night at October 21st. And that ended at 4:25 p.m. today. And so obviously it's now time for Ronald Wallace, Daniel Triplett's attorney, to ask the questions of Kevin Woodward. Judge Corley obviously did not want to start and go for 30 minutes and start all over tomorrow morning. So he let the jurors go in the court at 4:25. So tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Kevin Woodward will be on the stand and he will be taking questions from Daniel Triplett's attorney. And I'm sure there'll be some cross-exam, redirect, and all that good stuff. So that is my notes for the day on this one here. I see some few questions. I will get to those here in a few seconds. I want to say this. One of the notes on social media, there's been a lot of comments about a fair trial. I've addressed them a few times, but I want to kind of maybe deliver it here a little bit. There was probably 45 prospective jurors now it's down to 14 with 12 jurors and 2 alternate jurors. And I knew 2 of them. And remember, Logan County is a county of 48,000 people. Southern Logan County, Guthrie, Coyle, Meridian, Langston, Crescent, Mulhall, all of those. So a lot of the jurors didn't know about the case. Some had heard on the news, just like we all probably did. And so a few people I've seen on social media have talked about, well, Dan Triplett can't get a fair trial here in Logan County. Well, I don't believe that to be true, and I am 100% know that he can get a fair trial and is getting a fair trial in Logan County 3 days into this trial so far. But a judge just can't say, you know what, let's take this to Lincoln County. Let's take this to Pottawatomie County. If that was to even be considered, Daniel Triplett's attorneys would have to make that motion to the judge to make that decision. There would be conversations back and forth, but Dan Triplett's attorney did not make that motion to move it to another venue. He didn't make the motion to even have a discussion to move it to another venue. So Judge Corley never even had that in front of him. It had to be a motion made by Daniel Triplett's attorneys, and that did not happen. So I want to clear that up. So I think even if that motion was made, I think Judge Corley would have kept the trial here in Logan County. Just remember 6 years ago, yesterday, David Wade was killed in Logan County. His trial was held here in Logan County, and it was fine. I mean, obviously that made news worldwide. A deputy had died, and that trial took place in Logan County. I'm sure there are cases that could be moved out of Logan County and should be out of Logan County, but that case, in this case, have gone well. So I just want to get that out there. It's not just a judge's decision to throw it to another county. That has to be made by the attorneys, by Dan Triplett. That was not made. So I want to get that out there. Hopefully, if anybody sees those comments, you can maybe reply. You don't have to say I did. You can take all the credit for it. But yeah, that's the case. Okay, so let's get to some of these questions here. Hangry Mama. First question. Did they find any of his DNA on the duffel bag? That has not come up. I don't know. Remember, 2 people at the residence that it was found in had touched the bag, but that has not come up. DNA has not come up at all in this case. Maybe that's why I didn't have do a defense opening statement. I'm not sure what part that came in, but yes, if you haven't watched the first few of these episodes, Ron Wallace, Dan Triplett's attorney, reserved his opening statement. And I got to tell you, not that it's anything wrong, but there hasn't been hardly any cross-examination. If there has been, there's been just a few questions. And I got to tell you, just honestly, this attorney has a tough job. I mean, there is a lot of evidence in there, and I'm sure when we hear from Ron Wallace tomorrow, Ron Wallace interviewing Kevin Woodward, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions talked about. There's no murder weapon. The video, yes, there's gray shirt, white shirt, but you can't see Dan Triplett's face. You can't see Brent Mack's face in the video. So how, it's still tough because Brent Mack's there. Dan Triplett wasn't telling honestly where the last job was at. It took search documents to find where this actually was. Dan Triplett said he dropped him off at any location, whether the 3 that he said. Video evidence says he drove eastbound. Brent Mack didn't get out. So Dan Triplett said he dropped him off. Well, obviously, that's not true. Even if Dan Triplett didn't fire the weapon at the crime scene, but if he didn't fire it at the crime scene, how did he drop him off? So, does Daniel Triplett say, "I'm sorry, I lied. I didn't drop him off. We got into an argument. I got scared and I shot him"? Video does not show that. So I don't know where the defense is for this. I'm sure I'm waiting. That's what I'm waiting for. If we're going through a trial, I'm sure there's something there. Does it make sense? Maybe. Does it not make sense? Probably. I don't know. I just don't know what the defense is. And so there was no opening statement. It was reserved by Dan Triplett's attorney, which he has every right to do that. And I think he's just listening to all the evidence and looking for something to go after. But I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. This is going to be a lot of circumstantial evidence, but it's pretty strong at this point right now. And we probably won't know any of this until next week because Kevin Woodward will finish up tomorrow. I think the medical examiner is scheduled to be there tomorrow as well. And medical examiners usually take a little while to do their thing. But this trial's moved along fairly fast. But do remember, no court on Friday because of 89ers, and no court on Monday because of Judge Corley has a docket that he has. So we'll have a full day tomorrow, and then it'll pick up on Tuesday. Angry Mama, no need to move venue with such a clear video. Yeah, white shirt, gray shirt, in the hole. Dan Triplett says he dropped him off somewhere in town, but that obviously is a lie. Telling officers, investigators, that the last job was in Crescent. That was a lie. That was in Mulhall. Angry Mama, this is good that she says this. I'm a stickler for reasonable doubt, and this is enough to push past that doubt. Correct. Is there a gun? Is there a gun that matches that bullet? No, it has not been found. I don't think there's going to be any evidence in this case that it was found. Where it's at, no one knows. Maybe one person does. So there's no gun. There's no video of Dan Triplett's face at the septic tank, but he's the one who ordered it on September 17th. He's the one that was with the installers who put the tank in the ground the next day. So the people who installed it said he had called early. It was 8:30 in the morning. He was already calling by 8:30, wondering when they were going to get in there. They said he was businesslike. So there's a lot of this stuff that you would love to see the video evidence. You'd love to see 25 witnesses. You'd love to see all of that. That helps the case, but there's not a lot of that, but there's quite a bit of it. And a lot of common sense, but also you got to remember as a juror, and I put my same way as a juror. Obviously I know a little bit more what's going on, what's going to be forecasted, but if I'm going to put somebody in prison for the rest of their life, I have to be certain to do that. Just like the Force trial. Everyone says death penalty, death penalty, death penalty, and I agree. But if you're in that juror's box and you're the one that making that decision, you want to make sure you're right. You want to make sure you can go to bed at night knowing you made the right decision. And that's what these jurors are looking for. And that's what I'm looking for as well. And that's why you have a trial. Dan Triplett deserves that. He's innocent until proven guilty. And the district attorney's office has said that many, many times. His attorney has said that many, many times. And it's true. It's true. So any other things out there real quick? So we got a time frame. We got the motion to move it to another, or no motion to move it to another county. So hopefully we can kind of, might not change your mind, but a lot of times I'm not going to change anybody's mind. But when it comes to the actual facts, there was no motion filed. I'm going to make sure that is known out there and that kind of stuff. So any questions? I know you guys have paid close attention. I try not to go any longer than an hour 15. So I got about 5 minutes left in here. And the first couple were 30 and 40 minutes. And now we can't keep this at an hour, but there's so much information that I want to share. And that's everything on my notes. Another 6 pages of notes today, 6 pages yesterday. Tanya says this. I'm glad she does. I agree. I bet I have nightmares tonight. I cannot even imagine what these families are going through. It was tough. Mark Bruning was blunt, but truthful when talking about their loved one, Brent Mack. Drugs, arrest. Mark Bruning said Brent Mack someone was mowing a churchyard on the lawnmower that Brent Mack punched him in the face and took his shoes, I think is what he said. So there was a lot of tough stuff that the family had to hear, but there was a lot of stuff that the family was nodding their head. They agreed that he was a hothead and that he had troubles in his past. He wasn't perfect by any means. You can see the family agreeing with a lot of that, but it was still hard for them to hear that. But I thought, Mark Bruning no longer with us, but Mark Bruning delivered a clear message today to those jurors and to Dan Triplett and to everybody that was listening. Mark Bruning was good at what he did. So it was tough. It was good to hear his voice, but it was tough. So told myself I was going to be strong. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I was wanting to be honest with that. Mark was a friend. He was good. So, okay. I got to get out of here. I promised that was going to be tough. Couldn't do it. Almost. We will be in the courtroom tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And I will, if there's anything big, I'll break it at the lunch break, but I'll probably come back hopefully same time for the last day. So anyway, I am out. Sorry about that, guys.